I remember the exact moment the world seemed to drop out from under me. The glossy hardwood beneath my feet vanished, and the edges of the staircase blurred into a tunnel of air and light. My sister's hands had slammed into my chest with a force I had never felt from her before, and I was weightless for a fraction of a second before gravity dragged me down. 20 steps. I counted them later because each one left its mark on my body like tally marks carved into bone. I hit the landing in a heap, and the first sound I heard was her voice. She did not scream in panic. She did not cry out in remorse. She said calmly, like a rehearsed line you deliver to an audience you know will believe you. She slipped. "It is those socks." My breath was gone, replaced with a stabbing in my ribs that made every inhale a war. I tasted metal in my mouth. My vision swam. I wanted to tell my parents the truth before the lie took root. But when my father and mother came rushing in, they looked first at her, then at me, and I could see it in their faces. They had already chosen a side. My father bent down to my level, but not to comfort me. "You have to be careful on these stairs, Emily. Those socks are a hazard." My mother's eyes flicked to my sister, checking her for injury, as if I had been the aggressor. The heat rising in my chest had nothing to do with the pain in my ribs. It was fury, a deep, old fury that had been simmering since childhood, when the golden child could do no wrong and the scapegoat learned that truth in our house was whatever my parents decided it was. But lying on that landing, struggling to breathe, I realized something new. This time, I had not just bruises or a ruined school project to contend with. This time, my body was broken, and the truth was in the fractures themselves. I remember trying to push myself up, and a white flash of pain tore through my side so bright I nearly blacked out. My father's voice was above me telling my mother to get an ice pack. My sister was standing on the second step, arms folded, watching me with an expression I could not name. Not guilt, not fear, just calculation. She knew they would cover for her. They always had. She also knew I would be too hurt to fight back. She did not know about the doctor. She did not know that hours later in a cold exam room, a man in a white coat would look at my x-rays and say words that would split open decades of silence. This was no accident. That sentence would become the hinge on which my life swung from one side to the other. In that moment at the bottom of the stairs, I could not see the courtroom or the police reports or the look on my parents' faces when the evidence piled up. All I could see was the ceiling above me, the chandelier swaying gently from the force of my fall, and my sister's shoes 2 steps up, clean polished and perfectly still as if nothing at all had happened. I knew she would step right over me to get where she wanted to go. She always had. But this time, I would not let her. Growing up in our Pennsylvania hometown, people would often tell me how lucky I was to be part of such a respectable family. They saw the big brick house with its wraparound porch and flower boxes that overflowed in summer. They saw my father Richard in his sharp suits shaking hands outside the courthouse, and my mother Linda arranging bouquets in the front window of her flower shop. They saw my older sister Vanessa smiling in photographs posted in the local paper for every award ceremony and charity gala. What they did not see was the way the air inside that house bent around her like she was the sun, and the rest of us were satellites with no gravity of our own. From the time I could form memories, I understood that Vanessa was the standard and I was the cautionary tale. She was the golden child with perfect caramel hair and eyes that mirrored my mother's. She could get a speeding ticket and my father would joke about her lead foot. I could forget to close the garage door and I would be told I lacked discipline. The first time I realized the scale of the imbalance, I was 6 years old. I had spent days building a diorama of the solar system for a school project, carefully painting each planet and hanging them from bits of string. The morning I was to take it to school, I found the planets crushed on the floor, strings tangled and paint smeared. Vanessa was standing in the doorway holding a juice box. I told my parents she did it. My father barely looked up from his newspaper and said I should not have left it out where it could be damaged. My mother told me to be more careful with my things. No apology from her was expected or offered. That pattern was set early. When she borrowed my sweaters and returned them with stretched sleeves, I was told to share more. When she threw tantrums over not getting her way, my mother called it passion. "You know your sister feels things deeply," she would say, as if that explained away every smashed object and shouted insult. By high school, Vanessa's power was absolute. She could brush past me in the hall hard enough to knock my books down, and the only comment I would get from my father was to watch where I was going. Once during junior year, I was asked to prom before she was, and she took scissors to the dress I had saved up for. My parents bought me another one, but never confronted her. "That is just how sisters are," my mother said while pinning the hem as if violence over jealousy was a rite of passage. College was my first real taste of freedom. I went to Philadelphia for a communications degree and built a life away from home. I had friends who liked me without comparing me to someone else. I had my own small apartment and a job at a marketing firm. I came back for holidays and endured the usual comments, but I knew I could leave. Then the layoff came, and with it the crushing reality of my dwindling bank account. 3 months of job hunting yielded nothing, and the savings that had kept me afloat were gone. When I called my mother to say I might need to stay at home for a while, her voice carried an undercurrent I recognized. "Of course you can come back, Emily. This house will always be here when things do not work out." I told myself it was temporary, just until I found something new. But moving back was like stepping into an old wound. Vanessa at 30 still lived at home working a part-time job at a boutique her friend owned. She occupied the biggest bedroom and had turned the second guest room into her dressing space. The first night I was back, she cornered me in the kitchen and asked how long I planned to mooch off Mom and Dad. "Just until I find a new job," I said, keeping my tone even. She smiled without warmth and said good luck with that in this economy. The next weeks were a slow erosion of my patience. She used the bathroom when I was trying to get ready for phone interviews. She left the kitchen a mess when I needed to cook. She made digs at the dinner table about my employment status while my parents chuckled. I told myself to focus on applications and interviews, but living under the same roof again was like being shoved back into the shadow I had escaped. Every day I stayed felt like it chipped away at the independence I had worked so hard for, and I could sense Vanessa watching for the moment she could push me back into place permanently. The tension built slowly but predictably, like a storm you can smell long before the clouds darken. Vanessa had her routines and I had mine, but she always found a way to intrude. She would knock on my bedroom door without waiting for an answer, then stride in to borrow something she never returned. She would complain loudly to our parents if I used the washing machine when she wanted it, claiming I was deliberately inconveniencing her. At first, I tried to avoid her as much as possible, but the house was not big enough to stay invisible. The smallest interactions seemed to set her off, and my parents never failed to take her side. One evening at dinner, she remarked on my job search in a tone dripping with contempt. "Maybe the problem is not the economy, Emily. Maybe the problem is you." My father smirked into his glass of wine, and my mother changed the subject without looking at me. It was as if their amusement at my expense was an unspoken tradition. I began to spend more and more time out of the house in coffee shops, using spotty Wi-Fi to send out applications. The days felt longer and heavier, and each night I returned to find Vanessa in some new mood aimed squarely at me. Then came the day that would tip everything over. She had been in a foul temper for days after a public argument with her boyfriend Ryan. I overheard enough to know it was about him feeling suffocated, which I found darkly ironic given the stories I could tell. On the morning it happened, I had an online interview scheduled with a marketing agency in Pittsburgh. It was not my dream job, but it was a solid lead, and I was determined to make a good impression. I woke early, showered, and put on my navy blazer over a crisp blouse. My notes were laid out on the desk in the smaller guest room that I used as a makeshift office. The interview went well, and I left the room with a rare lightness in my chest, thinking I might finally be turning a corner. I headed downstairs intending to make coffee and text my friend Megan with the good news. The front door slammed just as I reached the kitchen. Vanessa's heels clicked on the tile and her sobs were loud enough to echo off the walls. She threw her purse onto the counter hard enough to knock over a vase of flowers and water spread across the marble. "He ended it," she choked out to our mother, who had apparently just returned from the shop. "Ryan ended it in front of everyone at the cafe." My mother dropped everything to comfort her, clucking softly and smoothing her hair. I stood off to the side, unsure whether to leave the room or risk becoming a target. My father came home early, summoned by an urgent call from my mother, and the three of them gathered around Vanessa like she was royalty in need of protection. Dinner that night was entirely about her heartbreak. My father suggested speaking to Ryan's father, who he knew from the golf club. My mother proposed inviting Ryan to the upcoming charity event so he could see what he was missing. I sat quietly pushing food around my plate, thinking of the times my own breakups had been dismissed as trivial. Without fully planning to, I spoke. Maybe this is a pattern worth looking at, I said. Her relationships seem to end the same way, and maybe there is a reason for that. The silence that followed was thick. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. You are jealous, she snapped. You have always been jealous of me. My father cleared his throat and told me I owed her an apology. I said I was not apologizing for making an observation and stood to leave. That was the moment I broke the unspoken rule, never challenge Vanessa. That night, she would make sure I paid for it. The morning of the attack began quietly enough to fool me into thinking the tension from dinner might have ebbed. My father had already left for the office, and my mother was at the flower shop preparing arrangements for a wedding. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen, and I relished the stillness as I sat at the kitchen table scanning job boards. I sent out 2 applications before heading upstairs to change into something comfortable. I had promised myself a short walk to clear my head before diving back into cover letters. When I stepped out of my room, I noticed the air felt heavier in the hallway, the kind of weight that warns you before you see the cause. Vanessa was leaning against the wall just outside the bathroom door, arms crossed, eyes cold. "Did you enjoy embarrassing me last night?" she asked in a low voice. I told her I was not trying to embarrass her, that I simply thought she might benefit from reflecting on why her relationships ended the same way. She shifted her stance, blocking the narrow hall. "Always so smug, always so sure you are better than me," she said. "You think just because you went to college and had a job, you can judge me." I told her I did not want to argue and asked her to move. "Make me," she said, and there was a flash in her eyes I had learned to fear over the years. I stepped forward to brush past, but she moved with me, mirroring my steps like a predator cornering prey. I tried again more firmly, placing my hand lightly on her shoulder to guide her aside. That was when she shoved me. It was not a nudge. It was a full 2-handed thrust aimed squarely at my chest. My feet slipped on the polished hardwood, and suddenly the world tilted. The first impact came as my hip struck the top step. Momentum took over, and I tumbled each edge of each stair, slamming into me in a blur of pain and noise. My shoulder hit hard enough to jar my teeth. My back took 2 consecutive blows that made my vision go white. Somewhere around the 12th step, my ankle twisted violently, and I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the thud of my body hitting the landing. When I stopped moving, I could not tell where the pain was worst. My ribs ached with a deep, grinding pressure. My shoulder burned, and my head felt light. Before I could draw in a full breath, Vanessa's figure loomed above me. She descended 2 steps slowly, her expression unreadable. "Get up," she said flatly. I tried to push myself up, and agony ripped through my side, forcing a cry from my throat. "Stop being dramatic," she said, and her voice had that same edge I remembered from childhood fights, the one that told me she was enjoying my discomfort. The front door opened, and my father's voice carried down the hall. "What is going on?" Vanessa straightened, glancing up toward him. "She slipped," she called out. "I told you those socks were dangerous." My father appeared at the top of the stairs, looking down at me like I was an inconvenience. My mother hurried in moments later, eyes darting between me and Vanessa. I tried to speak to say she pushed me, but each word stabbed my chest. My father knelt beside me not to check my injuries, but to examine the floor as if searching for proof of my clumsiness. "You have to be more careful on these stairs, Emily. Those socks could have killed you." The absurdity of his words might have made me laugh if breathing did not hurt so badly. "We should call an ambulance," I managed to whisper, but he shook his head. "No need to make a scene. I will drive you to the hospital myself." My mother went to get her coat, but he stopped her. "Stay here with Vanessa. She has been through enough today." He said it like I was the one who had hurt her. They helped me to my feet, my father's grip firm but impersonal, guiding me to the car while Vanessa watched from the doorway. I caught the faint curve of her lips, a satisfied smirk that told me she believed the matter was already buried. What she did not know was that the truth was etched in every bruise, every fracture forming beneath my skin. And for the first time in my life, I would not let their version of events be the only one told. My father drove in tense silence, one hand gripping the wheel while the other tapped impatiently against his thigh. Every bump in the road sent a sharp jolt through my ribs, and I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from crying out. When he did speak, it was in the tone he used when delivering closing arguments, calculated and authoritative. "Here is what happened, Emily. You were walking too fast down the stairs, you slipped because of those socks, and you fell. That is what you will tell the doctor." I stared out the window at the passing houses, the neat lawns blurring together. "She pushed me," I said, my voice low but steady. He glanced at me sharply. "Do not start with that nonsense. Do you have any idea what kind of damage you could do to this family with a lie like that?" My ribs throbbed with each breath, and the urge to scream at him was only held back by the knowledge that it would waste what little strength I had. At the hospital entrance, he parked and came around to open my door, helping me out with a grip that was more controlling than supportive. Inside the ER, a triage nurse with short blonde hair took my name and began asking questions. How did the fall happen? I opened my mouth but felt my father's gaze boring into me. "I tripped on the stairs," I said, finally hating myself for the words even as they left my mouth. She wrote something down and asked about my pain level. 8, I said honestly. My father tried to follow us into the exam area, but the nurse stopped him, explaining that hospital policy required the patient to be assessed alone first. The moment he was gone, it was like a weight lifting off my chest, though the pain was still a constant ache. An X-ray technician helped me onto the table, every movement sending a spike of pain through my body. He adjusted the machine and took several images before leaving me to wait. When the doctor came in, he introduced himself as Dr. Lawson and pulled up the images on a screen. "You have 3 fractured ribs on your right side, a dislocated shoulder, and deep bruising along your back," he said. "These injuries are not consistent with a simple fall." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" He pointed to the screen, tracing the lines of my ribs. "There are multiple points of impact, and the pattern suggests a forward force before the fall. In plain terms, someone pushed you." My eyes burned, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. "Yes, my sister." He nodded slowly and said he was a mandated reporter required by law to notify the authorities when there was evidence of assault. Panic flared in my chest. "My father will be furious." Dr. Lawson's expression didn't change. "My concern is your safety and the truth. We will have a social worker speak with you, and the police will be contacted." Relief and fear tangled together in my mind. For years, the truth had been swallowed, rewritten, and dismissed. Now it was printed in black and white on an X-ray, undeniable and unchangeable. For the first time, I began to believe that maybe their version of events would not be the only one that mattered. The social worker arrived within minutes, a woman in her 40s with calm eyes and a clipboard balanced on her lap. She introduced herself as Karen and explained she was there to make sure I understood my options. Her voice was low and steady as she asked me to describe what happened in my own words. I told her about the hallway Vanessa blocking my way, the sudden shove, the tumbling down the stairs, the pain that stole my breath. I told her about my parents arriving, ignoring my words, blaming my socks, and deciding to drive me themselves so there would be no scene. She took notes without interrupting, except to clarify details. When I finished, she said what you are describing is assault, and because it happened in your home with a family member, it is considered domestic violence. That phrase felt heavy in the air, like something I had been circling around my entire life without naming. She asked if I felt safe returning home. The answer came instantly. "No." My father's voice erupted in the hallway outside, demanding to see me, insisting they were making a mistake. Dr. Lawson's voice replied calm but firm that I was under their care and hospital protocol would be followed. Karen assured me that they would not let anyone in without my permission. She explained that an officer would be coming to take my statement and that I could request a protective order if I wished. A swirl of fear and defiance rose in me. This was the moment my parents had always counted on me folding under pressure on me, deciding that peace in the family was more important than my own safety. But lying there with my ribs screaming every time I breathed, I realized there was nothing peaceful about the life they were protecting. Officer Daniels arrived, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor who positioned herself so she could see both me and the doorway. She asked me to recount everything again from the moment I saw Vanessa in the hallway to the moment I arrived at the hospital. She asked specific questions about the force of the shove, whether my feet were on the stairs when she pushed, and what was said before and after. She photographed the bruises already blooming along my side and the scrape on my shoulder where it had hit the edge of a step. She requested copies of the X-rays, and Dr. Lawson agreed to provide them. When she asked if there had been prior incidents, something in me cracked open. I told her about the times Vanessa had shoved me into walls, slammed doors on my hands, thrown objects at me. I told her about the prom dress, the ruined school project, the countless smaller humiliations that were always dismissed as sisterly spats. I told her about my parents' constant refrains not to provoke her to keep the peace, to be the bigger person. Officer Daniels took it all down, and when she was done, she said, "Based on your statement and the medical evidence, there are grounds for assault charges." She explained the process step by step, making sure I knew I would have support from a victim advocate and access to resources like temporary housing. Karen handed me a card with her direct number and told me to call if I felt pressured to recant. Through the partially open door, I saw my father pacing in the hallway, his jaw tight, my mother beside him with her arms folded. They looked like they were preparing for a courtroom battle, not a conversation with their injured daughter. For the first time in my life, I did not feel the pull to appease them. Instead, I felt the faint, unfamiliar stirrings of control. They could tell whatever story they wanted to the neighbors, but here in this room with these professionals, my voice was the one that mattered. When Officer Daniels left, she told me she would be in touch once the report was filed, and that an investigator would likely want to speak with me within a few days. Karen remained a little longer, going over safety planning and reminding me that my well-being came first. As she left, she gave my arm a gentle squeeze and said, "You are not alone in this anymore." The words stayed with me long after the door closed, a quiet counterpoint to years of being told that loyalty to family meant swallowing the truth. In that sterile hospital room with my injuries displayed on a screen and my statement recorded in black ink, I began to believe that maybe the truth had a chance to stand on its own. News travels fast in a small town, and by the next morning, my phone, which I had kept on the nightstand beside the hospital bed, began to buzz with calls from my mother. I let the first two go to voicemail, but on the third try, I answered, bracing myself. "Emily, this has gotten completely out of hand," she said without even greeting me. "The police came to the house and questioned all of us. Your father is beside himself." I asked her what Vanessa told them. She said it was an unfortunate accident that you have blown out of proportion. My mother replied with a sharpness that carried through the line. "Natalie, you need to come home so we can sort this out as a family. Like you sorted it out when she pushed me down the stairs I asked, or like all the other times you pretended nothing happened. You are being dramatic, siblings fight, that is normal," she said in the same tone she had used my entire life to minimize every injury. "But involving the police making these accusations, this could ruin your sister's life. Is that what you want?" "What about my life, Mom? Does that matter to you at all?" She sighed and told me they had taken me in when I had nowhere else to go. "We have always been there for you." I ended the call saying the doctor advised me to rest. Over the next few days, their calls alternated between my mother's pleading and my father's thinly veiled threats. "You need to drop this immediately," he said 3 days later. "I have spoken to colleagues who assure me these kinds of cases are nearly impossible to prove. All you are doing is dragging this family through unnecessary humiliation." She broke 3 of my ribs. "Dad, accidents happen," he said dismissively, "but what you are doing is deliberate. Think very carefully about the consequences." The consequences began to arrive quickly. My car, still registered in my father's name, was reported stolen and I had to return it. My belongings at their house became hostages, with my parents refusing to let Megan collect them for me. My phone service was cut off when I was removed from the family plan. Megan helped me get a new phone, and I used my remaining savings to hire a lawyer recommended by the victim advocate. "They are trying to isolate and intimidate you," my lawyer, Catherine, explained during our first meeting. "This is textbook behavior in family violence cases." The intimidation spread further. My grandmother called from Florida in tears, begging me to stop this madness. Family friends left messages that sounded concerned but carried judgment. "We are all so worried about you," Emily said, my mother's friend, in a voicemail. Surely this can be resolved without all this legal unpleasantness. The weight of standing alone against my entire family pressed on me at night when panic attacks woke me gasping for air, convinced I was falling again. Megan reminded me they wanted me to doubt myself so I would drop the case. Maybe it would be easier, I whispered one night. Easier for whom, she said, and what happens the next time Vanessa loses her temper. She was right, but knowing that did not erase the dread. Meanwhile, my father began using his legal connections to delay proceedings, filing motions that stretched the process. My mother began dropping hints in her social circle about my supposed mental health problems. Emily has always been high-strung, she told her garden club. We are so worried about her state of mind. Each whisper was meant to erode my credibility, but with every attempt to silence me, my resolve hardened. If they thought cutting me off and tarnishing my name would send me crawling back, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. 6 weeks after the incident, Catherine called me into her office with an update from the prosecutor handling my case. My ribs were healing and the sling for my shoulder was gone, but the mental weight of the situation still sat heavy. The prosecutor, Jennifer Morris, had been quietly building a stronger case than I realized. We subpoenaed your medical history with your permission, she said, and found several prior ER visits that matched the pattern Dr. Lawson described. She opened a file and slid it across the desk. There was a broken finger at age 13, listed as a basketball injury, a concussion at 16 from supposedly falling off your bike, and a sprained ankle at 17 from tripping on stairs. I remembered each one vividly and how the truth had been rewritten before it reached the hospital staff. The basketball injury was Vanessa slamming a door on my hand. The bike concussion was from being shoved into a coffee table. The ankle sprain really was from stairs, but not from a misstep. She had chased me and I had fallen running from her. Each time my parents were there to tell the story their way, and the case was closed before questions could be asked. Jennifer also had statements from unexpected sources. A former neighbor, Mr. Talbot, recalled hearing loud arguments and thuds, followed by my father telling everyone to keep it down before the neighbors hear. My old high school English teacher remembered seeing Vanessa threaten me in the parking lot and later finding me in tears. The most surprising call came from Ryan's friend, who had witnessed her throwing a glass at him when he was late picking her up. All of it painted the same picture of a pattern stretching back years. The biggest breakthrough came when Megan reminded me about the old doorbell camera I had taken with me when I moved back in. It had been in a box in the closet, and I had forgotten about it after switching apartments. I gave it to Catherine, who had it analyzed. On it was grainy but clear footage from months earlier showing Vanessa shoving me on the porch during an argument. It did not capture the staircase incident, but it was visual proof of physical aggression and my lack of retaliation. Jennifer's voice was steady as she told me this is the kind of corroboration that tips a case. My anxiety about going public was still strong, but I began to see the possibility of actually holding her accountable. Megan and I spent evenings organizing every scrap of evidence into binders. Text messages from Vanessa dripping with contempt. Notes from doctors who had treated me for injuries over the years. The photos of bruises on my ribs taken at the hospital. Each page was a counterweight to the lies my family was telling. The thought of facing them in court made my stomach twist, but I knew the bigger risk was letting this pass unchallenged. If I stayed silent now, nothing would change, and one day it could be worse. That clarity became my shield in the weeks leading up to the hearing. I stopped answering calls from family members who only wanted to convince me to back down. I focused on strengthening my testimony and trusting that the truth in my evidence would speak louder than their rehearsed denials. Every night I told myself the same thing before bed. They can spin stories, but they cannot erase facts. And this time I have them. The courthouse on the morning of the hearing looked smaller than I expected, but the weight in my chest made it feel like walking into a fortress. Megan parked a block away and walked me to the entrance, her hand steady on my shoulder. "Remember, you do not have to look at them," she said. Inside, we met Catherine, who was already reviewing her notes in a navy suit that made her look both professional and unshakable. She led us to the plaintiff's table and explained the order of witnesses. They will try to rattle you, but keep your focus on the truth. Across the aisle, my parents sat with Vanessa and their attorney Gregory Hall, a tall man with a polished demeanor and a faint smirk that told me he thought this was already in the bag. My father wore his best courtroom suit, as if this were just another case on his schedule. My mother's hair and makeup were flawless, her expression a perfect blend of concern and restraint. Vanessa was dressed in a modest blue dress, her hair pulled back, her face arranged into the image of a wronged sister, bewildered by the accusations against her. The judge, a woman in her 60s, called the court to order, and the case began. Catherine opened with a calm statement outlining the evidence, medical records, x-rays, photographs, and testimony from multiple witnesses establishing a pattern of physical aggression and parental enabling. Then Dr. Lawson took the stand. He explained the nature of my injuries and why they were inconsistent with a simple fall. In my professional opinion, these fractures show multiple impact points with force, consistent with a push followed by contact with several steps, he said. There were older injuries visible in the scans which align with the history the patient has now disclosed. Hall tried to suggest that clumsiness or an awkward landing could account for the injuries, but Dr. Lawson did not waver. The fracture patterns are distinct and specific, he repeated. When it was my turn to testify, I kept my eyes on Catherine, answering each question with as much detail as I could manage. I described the hallway confrontation, the shove, the tumble down the stairs, the pain, the comments from my parents, and the decision to drive me themselves. I spoke about the years of smaller incidents, the ruined projects, the shoved shoulders, the slammed doors, the insults that escalated into physical contact. Hall's cross-examination was sharp. He asked about my employment history, hinting that financial stress might be motivating me to target my sister. He asked if I had ever been jealous of her. I answered each question directly without giving him room to twist my words. No, I am not here because of jealousy. I am here because she hurt me and has hurt me before, and I want it to stop. Vanessa took the stand next, and her performance was as smooth as I feared. She admitted we argued that night, but claimed I had tried to push past her, lost my balance, and fell. She said she ran down to help me, but I immediately started blaming her. My parents nodded slightly as she spoke, reinforcing her version. Catherine's questions were pointed, but Vanessa kept her composure, feigning hurt that I would accuse her of such a thing. Then Catherine called her final witness, Maria Santos, the former employee from my mother's flower shop. Maria walked to the stand with a steady gait and looked directly at the judge as she was sworn in. She testified that during her years working for my mother, she had seen Vanessa shove me on multiple occasions and that my parents had been present for at least 2 of those incidents. Once, she described me stumbling into a display shelf after Vanessa pushed me in the shop's back room. My mother had scolded me for being clumsy rather than address Vanessa's behavior. Hall attempted to discredit her, suggesting she had an axe to grind, but Maria's departure from the shop had been on good terms with a farewell party and a bonus. When asked why she came forward now, Maria's answer was simple. Because I heard she was in the hospital with broken bones, and I could not keep quiet knowing what I know. Her words hung in the air, and for the first time I saw my mother's hands tighten in her lap. Closing arguments were brief. Catherine emphasized the consistency of the evidence, the corroborating witnesses, and the medical proof. Hall focused on family loyalty and the risk of destroying relationships over what he called a tragic accident. The judge recessed for 20 minutes to deliberate. I sat with Megan, staring at the tabletop, trying not to imagine every possible outcome. When the judge returned, her expression was measured. Based on the testimony and evidence presented, I find clear and convincing evidence of a pattern of domestic violence perpetrated by Vanessa with enabling behavior by the parents, she said. She issued a 2-year restraining order, ordered Vanessa to complete anger management, and referred the case to the district attorney for possible criminal charges. As her gavel came down, I felt both lighter and heavier at the same time. Across the aisle, my family sat frozen, their perfect image cracked for everyone in the room to see. The ruling hit harder than I expected, not because I doubted the outcome, but because hearing it aloud made the break between us final in a way that could never be mended. Vanessa's face remained rigid, but the flush creeping up her neck betrayed the anger she was holding back. My father's jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the judge as if willing her to take back her words. My mother looked smaller somehow, her shoulders slightly hunched like she had aged a decade in a moment. Outside the courthouse, reporters from the local paper were waiting. Catherine guided me past them, but I caught fragments of their questions. "How do you feel about the ruling, Emily?" "Do you have anything to say to your sister?" I said nothing. The fallout began almost immediately. News spread quickly in our town, and within days, Vanessa's job at the boutique was gone. Officially, it was due to restructuring, but everyone knew the real reason. My mother's flower shop saw fewer customers. The same women who used to linger for coffee and gossip now avoided her entirely. My father's name was absent from the list of donors at the golf club charity drive for the first time in years. Megan sent me a screenshot of a community forum thread where people debated the case, some defending me, others lamenting the loss of a family's reputation. The restraining order meant Vanessa could not contact me directly, but that did not stop relatives from trying to mediate. Cousins I had not heard from in years messaged me about forgiveness and moving on. I responded to none of them. The consequences were theirs to live with. For the first time in my life, their version of events was not the only one the world knew. The truth had been entered into record in a courtroom, and no amount of small-town whispers could erase it. That thought stayed with me at night when the house was quiet, and I could almost imagine the echo of those 20 steps beneath me. Only now, when I replayed it in my mind, it was not followed by silence. It was followed by the sound of a gavel declaring that what happened to me mattered. In the weeks after the trial, life settled into a strange new rhythm, one defined not by constant vigilance, but by the deliberate act of reclaiming space. I returned to work at the design firm part-time, at first still mindful of the lingering ache in my back, but determined to move forward. Colleagues who had only known bits and pieces of what happened now approached me differently, not with pity, but with a kind of quiet respect. Megan visited often, bringing groceries or just sitting with me in the evenings when the weight of the past tried to creep in. Therapy became a fixture in my schedule, not because I wanted to relive the worst moments, but because I needed to understand how to live without them shaping every choice. Catherine remained a steady presence too, occasionally sending me updates about the slow grind of the civil case where damages were being assessed. Vanessa stayed out of sight, though news of her filtered in through the same small-town channels that had once been used to undermine me. She had moved in with an old school friend in another county, her name still popping up in whispered conversations at the market. My parents kept to themselves, rarely venturing beyond the walls of their home. Their absence from community events became almost as notable as their presence used to be. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of old family photographs, I came across a picture of Vanessa and me on the same staircase where she had pushed me. We were teenagers laughing, arms slung around each other. I stared at it for a long time before tucking it back into the box. The girl I had been then would have done anything to keep the peace, even if it meant swallowing every bruise and every insult. The woman I was now understood that peace built on silence was not peace at all. When the final paperwork for the damages arrived in the mail, I read through it carefully, then set it aside. Money could not undo what had happened, but it could help build the life I wanted free from the weight of their control. And that was a start. In the quiet that followed, I realized this was what it felt like to finally have the last word.